Welcome everyone to this roundtable on day 2 of our German pre-presidency conference on shaping the future of Europe. I would welcome you to this roundtable on European social cohesion and social security. My name is Vittoria Meissner and I'm a research advisor at the Institut für Europäische Politik here in Berlin. Many of you who have read the program will probably be surprised that it's not Mrs. Schneemecher, Paula Schneemecher, to introduce this session. She unfortunately has some internet problems, which can happen in virtual conferences and formats. So she apologizes, and we hope to be able to solve the problem in a very few minutes. And in the meantime, I hope that you are patient. I was just meant to be the backup moderator, and I will try to do my best. So again, good morning and welcome. With this session, we will have also a very brief introduction by our technical moderator from the agency Greenstorming, Julia. After this brief technical introduction with important information for you on how to ask questions during the Q&A, I will briefly introduce the topic of this roundtable's discussion and our esteemed speakers who are here today to share their insights with you. So let me introduce the topic under discussion here today. With the ongoing pandemic, the German presidency now faces unique challenges and has to modify the original program. Shaping Europe's economic recovery after Corona will be crucial and the presidency's main focus. However, in the medium perspective, other big issues like the climate change, digitization, and the future of work have to be tackled too. And nothing can be done without a safe budget. The negotiations of the multi-annual financial framework are still pressing. All these topics come in an environment where the European Union project has once again proven to be very fragile. Immediate crisis responses were rather national than European, borders were immediately closed, and negotiations on the recovery fund lead to new bloc building among member states. For example, when it comes to common debt issuance. As regards European social policy, the crisis has the chance to become boon or bane. On the one hand, it increases social challenges and existing inequalities. On the other hand, it proves once again that member states with strong welfare states are better prepared and more resilient in times of crisis. Immediate crisis responses, such as the SURE program, have shown a willingness to engage in real European cooperation when it comes to social cohesion. The question is now what the German presidency can make out of this unique momentum. In her speech laying out the plan for the presidency, Chancellor Merkel has named 4 priorities: immediate crisis management and economic recovery, the MFF, key priorities that had been among the initial flagship goals before the crisis, like the European Green Deal. Industrial strategy, digitalization, and reform of the common asylum system, and finally, topics that are still under discussion are also under the priorities. We will now discuss how we can gain momentum and make social protection and social justice part of all these 4 categories. What are the initiatives in the field of social and employment policy to enhance the social cohesion and to reach a fair Europe in general? What can be learned from the current crisis, and how can the European Pillar of Social Rights be integrated in the short and long-term crisis response mechanisms? How can the German presidency use its agenda-setting power to push for not only economic, but social resilience? To discuss all this question here today with us are our esteemed experts, which I would now like to shortly and briefly introduce. So first of all, I would like to welcome and introduce Professor Ian Beck. Ian Beck is Professorial Research Fellow at the European Institute and co-director of the Darendorf Forum, London School of Economics and Political Science. His research work focuses on the political economy of European integration and EU economic governance. His current and research projects include studies on the governance of EU economic and social policy, the economic and fiscal consequences of Brexit, evaluation of EU cohesion policy, and reform of the EU budget. Our next guest is Dr. Roya Butkovic. Welcome, Roya. Roya Butkovic works as a senior research associate at the IRMO Department for European Integration. His research focuses on democracy in the EU, institutional development of the EU, and industrial relations in Europe. He participated in the implementation of numerous international research projects, such as EU Impact. Then welcome Professor Miriam Hartlap. Miriam Hartlap is Professor for Comparative Politics, Germany and France at the Freie Universität Berlin. Her research and teaching focus on European integration and comparative politics, in particular, questions of power, polarization, and conflict in the EU multi-level system, implementation and compliance, soft law, and the intersection of economic and social EU policies. And last but not least, welcome Dr. Rolf Schmachtenberg. Rolf Schmachtenberg has been Permanent State Secretary at the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs since March 2018. He is responsible for the areas social insurance, provision for old age, participation, matters relating to persons with disabilities, social compensation, social assistance, and European employment and social policy. So without any further ado, let me now pass the word on to our first speaker on the program, Professor Ian Beck. The floor is yours. Professor Beck, please switch on your mic because it's still switched off. Thank you.
I had unmuted it, but it remuted itself.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the introduction, Victoria. We only have 5 or 6 minutes, so I'll go straight into the subject matter. European social cohesion is, to me, a very old question, but one with new salience as we try to confront the pandemic. And already in that statement, an old question with new salience, I think we can identify some of the complications that arise in trying to make sense of European social cohesion. You notice that I leave out the second part of the title to the other speakers. Let's pause for a moment to think about what social means in European integration. It's something persistent. We've seen a persistent demand, and now a very insistent demand, not just persistent, for solidarity. We expect, or at least some social groups expect, cross-border solidarity. And yet there is a paradox in this, which is that social Europe is something that the member states have been very reluctant to cede, to allow an EU competence in. And that tension pervades much of what goes on. Over many decades, we've seen a series of initiatives to try to deal with this, initiatives aimed at promoting social Europe. The latest is the European Pillar of Social Rights. I think it's seen as something which was advocated by the Juncker Commission, reinforced by the von der Leyen Commission as something complementing what I would call the hard and difficult obligations of economic and monetary union. Juncker saw as softening the demands, particularly on Southern Europe. It's now seen as a more positive agenda, something that should go alongside EMU. And we see it as a search for EU instruments. Those EU instruments are something that we struggled to find in the past. There is the European Social Fund, of course, and there are similar instruments in other areas of the budget. But let's be blunt about it. Compared with social protection policies in member states, the EU level of social instruments as spending instruments is pretty well negligible. It has some significance in some places. Now in von der Leyen's political priorities, we read about the new expression, we want an economy that works for people. Sounds great, sounds very warm, but you need to translate that into effective action if it's to be something useful. And this is what goes to the heart of this problem of reconciling the hard rules and expectations of monetary union with some forms of social solidarity. All that said by way of background, an obvious question is, what does the pandemic change? Well, the first thing it changes is that we are going to have a new scale and a new concentration of social problems. So far, it hasn't really happened, but I think we can expect before long a tsunami of job losses in many countries. Schemes like Kurzarbeit or different forms of furloughing help to mitigate that, but there will come a point where the public finances of the member states will struggle to continue with this scale of demand. The SURE scheme, the introduction of a temporary unemployment insurance scheme, is a valid response at European level. It's going to be quite generously funded, but it does have a very obvious shortcoming, which is that it's loans, not grants. It's not a scheme which means that countries which access it are insulated from the consequences, which will arise when they have to repay the loan. There are questions as well over Next Generation EU, the flagship policy put forward by the Commission a couple of weeks ago, about whether that is something that is going to have a genuine social component. And in this context, some of the next bit I'll leave to Hrvoje when he has his intervention. There's a question over whether the European Pillar of Social Rights can be a useful framework, or instead whether it's a kind of fair weather aspiration, something that works in good times, but really doesn't have much significance in the bad times we are likely to face over the next year or two. There is a concern about the reluctance to have a non-crisis program. For example, Spain and France have been strong advocates of a European unemployment insurance scheme. Will SURE be the new template for that, or will it be something that's continued to be resisted by the creditor countries of Northern Europe when the crisis abates? The good news, I think, is that we see a new emphasis on social in the economy that works for people narrative, in the continuation of the Juncker Commission's proposals for implementing social more forcibly than it has been in the past. The less good news, and here's where I'll finish, is to recycle a phrase used by Chris Hill in relation to EU foreign policy. We have a capability expectations gap. The expectations are great, the capabilities are limited, and I question whether that can be resolved in this particularly difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Beck. This echoes a bit the remarks that we had yesterday in our roundtable on migration and asylum, this gap between capabilities and expectations. Very interesting, thank you so much. And now I would pass directly the word on to Dr. Butkovic. Roya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will also try to be short because I see that we don't have much time. I will talk something about the perspectives of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And as we all know, European Pillar of Social Rights was adopted in 2017 at the Göteborg Summit. And it is a set of principles that should lead to measures of implementation at the EU and member states level in the form of legislative and policy initiatives. It builds on 20 principles which are set in 3 categories: equal opportunities and access to labor market, fair working conditions, social protection and inclusion. It is the very fact about it, which was criticized by many experts, is that it is legally non-binding. Nonetheless, despite all this, it had a lot of political weight in the last 3 years, and we see this through the various, legislative initiatives which were done at the EU level in the last 3 years. It certainly, I would say, could be seen as an answer to the situation which we had in the post-financial crisis Europe, where it became evident that because of the drastic austerity measures in the southern European program countries, that the European Union is suffering from the so-called social deficit. And in this sense, now talking about what was done so far, it should be noted that the European Commission has introduced the so-called social scoreboard to the European semester process, which compiles data such as early school leavers, unemployment rate, the share of population at risk of poverty, and based on that, it classifies countries between best performance and the most critical cases. But of course, it remains to be seen how this will actually these indicators will weight compared to the macroeconomic scoreboard indicators. In terms of legislation, the European Union so far has introduced, the Work-Life Balance Directive. Then we have the Transparent and Predictable Working Conditions Directive, European Labour Authority. But all of these initiatives are perhaps overshadowed with what is announced for the upcoming period. In terms of the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, and this is done in the Commission Action Plan 2020-2021, where we have initiatives. We also heard about it, such as the EU minimum wage framework, which would assure that in all member states a certain percentage of the median wage is included, is the minimum wage. Then the EU reassurance mechanisms for the national unemployment benefit schemes, which would make sure that none of these unemployment benefit schemes goes bankrupt, or the child guarantee scheme. The problem here is that these very ambitious programs could eventually be challenged legally in the member states, because of course all of these topics fall under the area of mixed competences between the EU and the member states. And so what would be needed to done is to actually reduce this gray area between in the mixed competences, and bring more clarity into what is the competence of the European Union, what is the competence of the member states. This is unfortunately easier said than done, because we would need treaty amendments to the treaties, which is very difficult in the current circumstances. But certainly, what was already mentioned is that the current Commission has much more ear for the social aspects of the integration, and that in Europe, and Ursula von der Leyen has indicated that reform of the European semester framework, in order to so that the social rights will not be contradicted with the economic policies, that they will go hand in hand. This is, however, again, easier said than done, because the fact is that many of these economic and trade policies are contradicting the social objectives of the EU, and it is it will be very interesting to see how they will try to accommodate this, how they will try to find some kind of balance. I would say that because of the increased EU spending, which we saw recently, which has been announced, and so this represents a chance for the European Pillar of Social Rights to become much more a reality than it was so far. but it will ultimately depend on what was already mentioned, the relationship between grants and loans within the Next Generation Europe program, and also the final composition and the structure of the multi-annual financial framework, how the social Europe will fare compared to all other topics within the multi-annual financial framework. One way forward with the European pillar of the social rights, and here I'm really close to concluding because I know we don't have much time, is that you would make it legally binding. And this is what was suggested by many scholars. We have a precedent here. The Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union used to be non-legally binding, and then it became legally binding. So that perhaps could be a way forward. But the problem is, of course, that we would need treaty amendments for that to make this happen. In any way, I would conclude with maybe slightly more optimistically than my predecessor, and say that while some 6 months ago we could still, many people would say, we could roughly conclude that the European pillar of social rights is nothing more than a window dressing. Now I think with this increased spending at the EU level, we are really having a chance to make it to make it much more real for the people. It will, of course, depend on the outcome, economic outcome of the crisis, which we still haven't seen, and how the situation will look in fall. And depending on that, much will depend on this. But I would say that what we've seen so far could result with some more visibility and a better outcome in terms of implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights in the upcoming months and years. And here I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roya, for also this optimistic conclusion. And now I will pass the word on to Professor Hartlapp. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. The previous speakers have already highlighted some of the features of the European Pillar for Social Rights. It's very important to strengthen the visibility of the social dimension of the EU, but it's also rather programmatic in nature. It's a label to cover a number of very different governance instruments that have very different capacity to actually change what is going on in the member states. In particular, as Ian Beck stressed, in the upcoming, what we all expect, difficult economic situation. So I think that it's very important to strike a good balance between creating hope and therefore pressure for more social Europe, but also proposing initiatives and instruments that are legally possible, that can gain political majorities, and that have a genuinely social dimension in them, right? So that are not disguised economic policies in a sense. Now, how could such concrete, feasible measures look like when addressing concrete issues that came up with the pandemic? And I think we have all seen how dear and how central freedom of movement is to the EU integration with the crisis, with the lockdown of borders. There are 20 million people who live and work in another member states, 1.5 million who on a daily basis cross borders, and more than 3 million posted workers annually in the EU. And they have been hit particularly hard by the lockdown measures and the closure of borders. And we've also, in particular in the German media, seen how they are somehow linked to these local hotspots of the outbreak again emerging, right? So we see that some of the industries that benefit in particular from the free movement of workers are also industries that show living and working conditions for these workers that are really shameful, These are images of modern slavery. And I think that this very nicely brings into visibility a general problem of EU economic integration. That it's basically economic integration, and that the EU hasn't done enough to strengthen the social market aspect, to make this market social and fair for those workers. They are not protected by their home countries that sent them, but they're equally not sufficiently protected in the host countries where they come and work, right? And we have some industries where this is very visible. It's food industry, it's elderly care, social care, it's construction sectors, etc. Now, the EU has done a lot to allow for the mobility and allow these sectors to benefit from freedom of movement. And of course, we also know that some of the practices are illegal, but there's also a gray area. There are loopholes that exist in the EU legal regime that can be exploited and unevenly exploited by business and not by workers. And I think here's a real challenge that should be addressed by the presidency and by EU social policy developments via agenda setting. What could this look like? First, it would be important to empower national administrations, labor inspectorates, audits, customs services with knowledge, savoir-faire, to address these problems that they are less acquainted with. They have been set up to control national legislation on a national territory. Now we have mobility of a labor force that raises new issues. How to control whether social protection coverage is paid in the sending countries. These are new issues, and there needs to be much more support for national administrative structures to deal with that. The European Labour Authority, the previous speaker mentioned as part of the European Pillar of Social Rights, has been set up and starts working, but it should really be funded in a much more generous way. And it should have clear competences to address the problems and to implement the acquis communautaire that is there. I mean, the new Posted Worker Directive does provide a legal tool to avoid some of these very poor working and living conditions. Agency work. So there is a key and it needs to be implemented. Now, administrative cooperation doesn't sound very glamorous, right? But I think there are real distributional consequences that are linked to a better functioning here, and that should be considered as a political task and addressed at the EU level. Closely related, and Victoria mentioned this, is the issue of social cohesion and the increasing inequalities. We can expect that inequalities between EU countries are going to rise even further with the economic downturn. We know that extreme poverty is particularly apparent in the economically weakest member states in the south and east of Europe. That we shouldn't be surprised that not only the well-qualified and skilled workers move within the common market, but that the poorest of the poorest follow them, right? And this is, of course, first of all, a problem for these individuals to live in extreme poverty, but it can also become a political problem for the EU. Why? Because media pick up these images of welfare tourism in Europe. We have seen how during the Brexit referendum, this was a very important discourse and debate that polarized and that strengthened anti-EU voices and gave a strong argument into the hand of right-wing populist parties to work against European integration. So I see a need to address that. And one way to do that would be with a new EU instrument for a social minimum income scheme. That's part of the European Pillar of Social Rights. I think it's goal 14 or something. There is a legal basis. There are different proposals on the table by colleagues like Martin Höppner and Benz, who have worked on how to implement that as part of the European Social Fund Plus. And I think there's political momentum to really have a really solidarity instrument. Why is that the case? Well, I said it's legally feasible, so it's not something that needs to be done in a soft law measure. like some other proposals that are on the table. It has more punch. It is solidarity because it gives to the poorest of the poor, and solidarity always means that there is that those that have support those that don't have. So that comes with the term, I think. When we look at the difficulties to adopt binding legal measures in the past, that was frequently driven by different structural interests between the East and the West in the council settings. Now, this is an instrument where we could have more hope that it would also appeal to Eastern European countries because they would benefit from it in a stronger manner. So these are two, I think, rather modest proposals, politically feasible, legally feasible, but they could really reduce the numbers of those who see European integration as the reason for growing inequality, income disparities, and social injustice. And therefore, I would hope that the German presidency takes these up. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Hartlaub. This is a perfect last sentence to pass now the word to Dr. Rolf Schmachtenberg. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming together to this round table, and thank you also for organizing this round table. Can you all listen to me well or not? It's fine?
We can all hear you perfectly.
Perfectly, that's great. So in 5 days time, Germany will take over the presidency of the Council of the European Union. However, nobody could have guessed that we would be experiencing the worst economic crisis since the Second World War, both in Europe and Germany as a whole. On the other hand, this has completely changed our plans. We will have to put a lot of energy into overcoming the crisis, and by the way, also maybe to handle Brexit issues, but also there. On the other hand, the crisis has demonstrated that we were and we are working on the right issues. Even before the crisis, we said we need better social protection and more social justice in Europe. What was really already necessary has now become all the more pressing. And to come back also to the previous speakers, I think in this context, the European pillars of social rights are really a good base, because this is a common agreement within the European Union, within the team of the European member states. They have agreed on these 20 principles, and they give us a compass and what we are doing now and what we can propose now. We have not to discuss the base, we can build on this. And so I would like to emphasize 2 points. We really want to actively promote the upward convergence of living conditions in Europe. The crisis has made one thing very clear. Societies with strong welfare states and well-developed public services are better prepared to meet the current challenges. They have the administration you need to handle such a crisis. They have the pipes and tubes of the social security system to generate money flows you need in a short time. So robust social safety nets with instruments including short-time work allowances, unemployment benefits, and minimum incomes are now essential. And there's now, I think, a big common sense in European population that it is so. And measures in these areas are playing a central role in how Germany and Europe are dealing with the crisis, also relative to others outside Europe. And in the debate on the next generation EU recovery package, one thing is therefore particularly important to me. Our conception of resilience cannot encompass just economic aspects. It must include the social dimension as well. In addition to focusing on innovation, sustainability, and growth, the European response to the crisis should also make promoting robust welfare states a top priority. In order to advance these goals, the federal German government wants to promote European minimum standards in 2 core areas of the welfare state during Germany's presidency, relating to the already mentioned number 6 and 14 of the European Pillars of Social Rights. And what I'm presenting now is really the decision by the German government from last Wednesday, when the German government decided on the program of the European presidency. So on the one hand, we want to help the negotiations on the legal instrument for fair minimum wages that has been announced get off to a good start. Such an EU framework would help us shield employees from loss of income, especially in times of crisis. We know there's a lot of debate to be done, in particular about the role of social partners in defining minimum wages, but we are very optimistic that we find a synergetic view of this approach, the Scandinavian view, the more government-related views. It's about the goal of having minimum standards in the wages, knowing that there are different ways which yield to the goal. On the other hand, we want to promote an EU framework for minimum income schemes. Robust social safety nets can help to mitigate the risk of poverty caused by the crisis. This means we are working to see EU member states agree on common minimum standards in key areas of the welfare state. As per our plan of the foreseen EBSCO meetings, we would like to discuss conclusions of the EBSCO concerning minimum income in the October session. And we are expecting to get a proposal on minimum wages by the European Commission in October, such that we will have at least first discussions during the December meeting of the EBSCO in the upcoming presidency. So a first welcome conclusion plus some hints then for our friends from Portugal, which will have the next presidency. And they are very much in favor also of this topic, so that's a good combination. We can warm up and then they will maybe cook the plate. But the second point is we must also ensure that the structural change happens in a way that is fair. Climate change and digital technologies will transform entire industries, as was already clear before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Particularly in Germany, we have very much the impression that structural change is now boosted. There are companies which have now difficulties. It was clear they will have difficulties, but now they have them much faster and much deeper than we were hoping for before the crisis. Therefore, more than ever, we must ensure that technological progress is also social progress. This entails, in particular, skilling initiatives. There we have changed a lot of the national laws, but this has to be also part of a European upskilling strategy. The central EU employment policy instrument for this is the European Social Fund Plus. Here it's important that we strengthen the financing. In this context, we might have now also a reshaping of the youth guarantee. This will also be discussed in the October EBSCO meeting. And so it's very important that we have a good and sufficient amount of money in this European Social Fund Plus. I would also take up a point which Miriam made, which we are discussing now daily in Germany, that is social protection and social security of trans-border mobile workers. This will be another main topic, which we have, as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, added on our agenda as a main topic. Actually, the migrant workers, they move to improve. And the migrant workers are those who maybe are most linking Europe, because by their own professional biography, they are combining Europe. They are those who can compare living standards in different parts of Europe. They are experiencing Europe. On the other hand, very often they are exploited based on business models which basically are based on the huge economic differences between European member states, which actually comes back to motivate what I firstly said. That's why we are so much motivated also to come forward in the upward convergence with minimum income, minimum wage, because that is a prevention for this kind of business models to be avoided. But we see here some problems in the coverage of social protection and social security, which we will analyze, and we hope that we will be able to propose some conclusions, maybe even then proposing some initiative for the European Commission in the October EBSCO. So, to conclude, we have to prove that European solidarity is not just an empty phrase, but a reality. To work on the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, in particular number 6 and 14, is a part of our way to react and to deal with the challenges of the crisis. And for us, it's not simply a question of overcoming the crisis, but crisis, chance, it's a chance for a good future of Europe, actually, that we find our European ways to deal with these challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rolf Schmachtenberg, for this very interesting input. I have now the pleasure to open the floor for discussion, and I already have a question from Gabi Umbach. She writes, talking about national minimum wage, how are ideas and national test phases on universal basic income schemes reflected in the recovery plan discussion? Are they seen as feasible alternatives? And so I would suggest that we can pass the question on to the speakers on the panel, and maybe start by with you, Rolf Schmachtenberg. If you would like to answer the question, the floor is yours again. You would need to unmute your microphone again, sorry.
Thank you very much, Gabi Umbach, for this question. I think we have to go in a step-by-step way based on what the European Treaty allows to do. And we have the recommendations from '92, which are a good framework. And I think we have to come up with clear guidelines how in future national minimum wages are defined, how they are regularly monitored. And I think what is also very important is that they really reach everybody, that you have a system of minimum wages which is universal within each country. And so it's first about implementation of transparent rules, how to define minimum income, how to develop minimum income, and also to monitor it. All European countries, as per the acquis communautaire, they have some minimum income schemes, but they are very, very different. And there's a way of convergence also in the way they are implemented, what they cover. For example, now this initiative in Spain is very interesting, where it's about, yes, they had a minimum income scheme, but it was on the local, municipal level. Now they come up with a national level refinancing. So it is this progress which we would like to promote.
Thank you so much. I have now Jan. You wanted to add something? Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Victoria. There is a dilemma in all of this, which is that there are many things which might look desirable or attractive in today's environment, but timing is of the essence. Something like the basic income idea that Gabi mentioned is under discussion in many countries, but is not something that's likely to be introduced rapidly, because it's going to take a huge amount of deliberation to agree on whether it's appropriate or whether it's going to work. Some of my American friends, and as an American citizen, you may know that they're all obliged to pay taxes to the US, even if they're living in other countries, have been surprised and even delighted to receive a check from Donald Trump as a result of one of the programs in the American recovery package, which paid a certain amount to every household earning below $99,000 a year. Now that is, if you think about it, a form of basic income, except it was a one-off payment. What would be very difficult at European level, or even in individual countries, is to work out the mechanics of a system of basic income rapidly enough to make a difference during the crisis. And I think that the major challenge Europe faces is that the crisis is now. The need for responses is now, and the fiscal capacity of different countries, something I mentioned earlier, is very different as they confront this. So it's all very well to say, let's have a minimum income or raise the minimum wage, which will affect the public sector spending, at a time when the capacity of a country like Italy or Greece to implement it is extremely limited. And this therefore poses a big challenge for the EU recovery package of the degree to which we're going to allow for cross-border assumption of the risks that are implicit in social protection. That's where I think the debate at European level is going to find it very difficult to find answers.
Thank you so much for this intervention. Maybe Miriam, you want to add something? Professor Hart, I'm sorry, the first voice.
I mean, Ian had really stressed how difficult it is to agree on more on new measures at the European level, in particular when they touch about fiscal capacity. And it's not only the difficulty to agree on it, but at the same time you have counter signals from Brussels addressing, like we've seen that in the last big crisis, in the Euro crisis, austerity measures that have urged member states to limit spending. So there are different signals from different policy areas at the EU level, and that these are more, the tension is more visible for some instruments than for others, and I think this is one. I would like to add an aspect. That is these what we have seen, and Rolf Schmachtenberg said that the resilience of national countries to deal with the COVID crisis was very much influenced by the capacity of the national welfare systems. And what worked in particular well was welfare systems that have a strong link to inclusive labor markets, like that really work together, the welfare aspects and work aspects. And we know that from the debate about minimum income schemes, that this needs to be engineered in a very careful way to keep that intact. So that would be, again, something that adds to the complexity to come forward, the differences between member states in the nexus between welfare policy and labor market policy. Can I have a go on a different aspect? I would like to, and that's social partnership, because that's also something that we have seen to work well in times of crisis. When it comes to, for example, implement temporary short-term measures and things like that, not only in this crisis, but also in previous crises. Now, I would really be interested to see or to hear some ideas about how to revitalize social partnership at the European level. And I think that digitalization comes with a big promise in this respect. Because a lot of national social partner organizations do have the feeling that their way of organizing co-determination and their role in national economies is somehow challenged by digitalization. So this would really be a topic that could be dealt with at the European level and could function as a forum or arena to bind that together and to see how the benefits of the European social model, which is often linked to strong social partnerships, can be carried into an era of digitalization. And that's both on the formal level, how to organize co-determination, but also on a substantial level, because work relationships change. And this needs to be somehow addressed. And I think that could really be something, a topic for the EU, and something that would strengthen social economic model in Europe compared to the US or China, for example.
Thank you so much, Professor Hadler. Maybe Roya, also a brief comment or answer to the questions.
Yes, I think just what Miriam has said about the social partnership. Yeah, I would agree that it's a wonderful idea, a very good idea that, you know, digitalization represents a chance to actually make some added value to the when we talk about a social partnership at the European level. At the same time, I would say that you know, one thing that comes to my mind is that perhaps in some of its the directives concerning you know, the industrial relations, the European Union should be much more how to say, strong and assertive than it was all until now. For example, what we have right now, one project about the European Work Council, councils, and it seems that what we are getting as a result that a new directive on the European Working Council could be a way forward, because the one which we have right now is very, how to say, soft, and it allows multinational companies to have these European Work Councils or not to have them, and it is very, very much, it would need to be much more strict towards the companies than we right now see. And right now what we are seeing that mostly this is used as some kind of a communication information channel, and not so much as a consultation platform. That's all. Thank
you. Thank you, Roya. I have now Jan. You have another point you would like to make?
Well, in the absence of questions from our audience, I thought it might be useful to raise a different complication in all of this, which is the scale of the political challenge. Everybody can read the European Pillar of Social Rights, particularly the two lines 16, clauses 6 and 14 that have been mentioned so far. But the trouble with this is that in principle, it all sounds very good. What matters to citizens, though, is implementation and true delivery of things that change their lives. As one late lamented American president put it, where is the beef? You need to show citizens that all this very powerful language about principles at European level is translating into something that affects their lives. Now, what do they see in different countries? They see massive programs for subsidizing business, 9 billion euros for Lufthansa alone being put forward, and citizens begin to wonder, what's coming to my pocket? So maybe the challenge is to see, are we offering something realistic that citizens can recognize as being directly beneficial to them?
Thank you, Jan. That's also true, unfortunately. So with an eye to the time, I would kindly ask the remaining speakers to maybe briefly comment on what Jan just said, if you would like to do so, and then I would wrap up in order for us to listen to the concluding remarks of the conference. So maybe Rolf Schmachtenberg again, if you would like.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, it's about fiscal capacities. And as you rightly said, Jan, in your first statement, social policy is a national affair, and the European budget is relative to the national budget, not such an important tool. So SURE initiative is maybe now a difference. You said it's loan-based, rightly, but the amount is quite substantial. This might be now helpful actually to refinance SURE scheme, short-time schemes in different national member states. This is a concrete possibility I see. We have now the debate in France already to withdraw the short-time scheme there, and there might be parallel discussion in many other countries. So at this point, sure might be very, very crucial to allow for member states to continue or to have for more time, short-time schemes. And on the other hand, we have to, within our national policies, we have to be balanced in the policy of intervention, that we have a package which considers different aspects of the society. For the German fiscal package, it was also a very important aspect that we have investment for the future. So one is to balance it socially, but the other is also not only to react, but to create a momentum to the future by some initiatives in the technological fields and the field of sustainable growth.
Thank you very much. Miriam, now also very brief last comment, if you want.
Well, I share everything Ian said, but I think that the EU probably, for a lack of legal competences, a lack of funding, shouldn't try to reinvent national social policy and welfare systems. Rather, it should aim at strengthening and giving room to these policies at the national level to strive and to develop and to be reformed, right? That's the first point. The second point is there is a substantial amount of regulatory EU social policy that's not as bad as we sometimes believe. And I would just like to highlight anti-discrimination policy, which we haven't talked about, which has really been an added value to almost all member states. So that needs to be kept and strengthened and well implemented. And then the last point maybe was not sufficiently sure. When I talked about social partnership, the idea would really be to highlight what actors at the national level could gain from joining in forces and creating a debate on social Europe at the supranational level. And I think that for some issues and some topics like digitalization, there's more of a chance to have them really cooperate and develop joint ideas than for policies that are deeply entrenched in national institutions' way of thinking and doing things. So new topics come with a greater opportunity in my eyes.
Thank you, Miriam, also for being very brief. Roya, now to your last brief comment on this.
I would just say that, you know, the citizens have what are they experiencing as a feeling of injustice is what is connected with the prior financial crisis, and this is this privatization of the gains of the multinational companies and socialization of the losses. And we are seeing the same kind of a situation now. And in this context, I would just say that the European Union has to do it most it can, not to forget small and medium-sized enterprises, and to give them the similar kind of support which is going to be given to the big one, either through its policies or in some cases directly. I think that would be very important not to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yes, Ian, very short, sorry. But
one sentence. This is a big political challenge for Europe. And if it does not rise to that challenge, it's going to be potentially damaging to the whole cause of European integration.
Thank you very much. This sounded also like a very important call. And I think that the German presidency has now a lot on the table. Probably not everything can be solved within 6 months. But I think that you are willing to push social integration forward. We listened to these very important insights and also to the fact that there is momentum and that we need change now for a real implementation and not currently just something that is already on the paper. Yes, and that it is of course difficult to agree between member states that have very different fiscal capabilities, very different systems. But I think that yeah, the German presidency could help with its agenda setting power to at least move in a specific direction. So I would like, as I said, with an eye to the time, to thank all the speakers very much for this very insightful discussion, all the participants for being here, and I apologize again for pushing on the time. We will now, or we have already shared the link in the chat that you can click on to directly be then in the next room where we will have our concluding remarks for this conference. So please just click on the link in the chat below. And maybe you will have to wait a few seconds before the new meeting starts. Again, my heartfelt thanks to everyone, and see you shortly. Bye-bye.